Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Well, Cake Week, it is here. It's not a true Cake Week because 12 of the 16 SEC teams are facing one another. So it's not a traditional Cake Week. Kind of week 12 and week 13 are kind of a combined Cake Week in this new SEC. By the way, do we need a disclaimer on why it should be Cake Week and not Cupcake Week for the non-OG listeners of the show?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically that we're not huge fans of massive amounts of icing, right?
Yeah, I mean, icing has its place. It has its place, but cake is better than cupcakes. I shouldn't need to explain that. The bigger version of something is better than the smaller version of something, and everyone should like their Cake Week matchup. So why cupcake is such an unbelievably soft term. I get it, and that applies in a lot of ways, but it's about feasting, and you feast on cake. You don't feast on cupcakes. Cupcakes are just there. Cake is something that you legitimately will pay for, like a Cake Week matchup. But anyways, yeah, do people pay for cupcakes?
I was about to say, I don't know how many times I've ever bought myself a cupcake. That's a really good point. We receive cupcakes. They just appear.
I think that was like a 2010s craze for a minute, where people got really into cupcakes.
Artisan cupcakes that were like, that's what I'm talking about. They're like 3 stories tall. Yeah, I got out on that fast.
Those are tough to eat too. Really, really tough to eat for the beard community. You know what I speak of. Not the best bite, but nonetheless, yes, it is week 13 in the SEC. Somehow, I get that's the way that time works, but my God, that feels wild to say out loud. By the way, Sony Michel coming up, the Georgia legend. Great conversation with him. Plus, we will have Lad of the Week. Your boy's got to have a sad Lad of the Week that we will get to, unfortunately. But a lot of games to break down. We've got 6 games to break down. Let's start with this one. Number 9, Ole Miss, 10.5-point favorites against Florida. The over-under I have, Will, is 1.5 references to Lane Kiffin's SEC championship comments. If you missed this, somehow feel like it's been the only thing that's been discussed on SEC internet lately, and I'll just say internet and leave it at that. Lane said this week that he talked to other SEC coaches who don't want to play in the SEC championship because the risk of getting knocked out of the playoff outweighs the reward of a bye. I think the easy thing to do is to clown Lane and just stay like, hey, stop complaining, go in wherever you're told to go in. Stop getting into the semantics of this and all that. I think Lane is doing this, and I think he's at least acknowledging the obvious, right? The SEC is going to have at least 1 2-loss team in its conference title game. Could even be 2 of them. I mean, that is still on the table, depending how this plays out with Texas and Texas A&M. Lane is trying to warn the selection committee, and I don't really blame him for doing this because I might be doing this as well, okay? He is saying, look, if you punish a team for reaching the SEC championship or any conference championship, by the way, if you punish that team for playing in a conference championship and instead putting in teams that are going to be idle during conference championship weekend, you will have a mutiny on your hands, and you will do the exact opposite thing of what you are trying to do by incentivizing these conference championships, which currently are being incentivized more than they ever have been before by being rewarded with an automatic bid and a bye if you are one of the 4 highest ranked conference champs, okay? This is 100% different than years past. In years past, you could have a 1-loss SEC team in there who loses in the SEC championship game and falls out of the top 4, just as Georgia did last year. Georgia did that 2019. Georgia did that 2018. But here's the issue. In those seasons, you didn't have idle teams who were worse than a conference championship loser, then jump them in the final rankings. Notre Dame was 12-0 in 2018, and it was idle, but it already was ranked ahead of Georgia, even going into the conference championship weekend. It was number 3. Georgia was number 4. Oklahoma earned that final spot in 2018 because it won the Big 12 championship that day. It wasn't idle. That is entirely different than if Georgia or Ole Miss reached the SEC championship because it's better than Tennessee, but then because Georgia or Ole Miss loses in the SEC championship, it then gets left out and Tennessee gets put in at 10-2. Okay. The only kind of example of that scenario that played out in the 14 playoff era was 2017 when Auburn was number 4 in the playoff poll and it lost to Georgia in the SEC championship, the rematch of that game, and then idle Alabama moved past Auburn and into the playoff, I'd argue that's slightly different because you were comparing a 3-loss Auburn team to a 1-loss Alabama team.
Mm-hmm.
They played in the same division too, so it's not even like, oh, this is comparing undefeated Indiana to 2-loss SEC team or something like that. It's not even that, all right? Their schedules are very, very similar. That's still not like, oh, Alabama is ahead of Georgia, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, but then, oh, Alabama loses and falls behind, all 3 of those idle teams because it had one more loss and one more game. Do you get kind of what I'm saying with this and why there is, I think, an actual gripe that needs to be out there and needs to have people at least aware of this going into conference championship weekend?
Yes, 100%. Much to say about this. I obviously, not going to go into all of it, but I will say this. Remember, I'm consistent about this. Lane Kiffin is currently winning. Okay, like Kiffin's hot right now. So if Lane Kiffin were number 15 or number 20 and had lost like a random game and was out of the conversation, everybody would be, Lane Kiffin, you loser. You'll never make it. So you don't care. Now he is objectively, and this is how I would feel almost regardless about something like this, where it's just objectively kind of a good point. Like this would be a thing I would support Lane Kiffin, but say you're not a good messenger for this if he were out of the conversation. Now the fact that Lane Kiffin is in the conversation means that we can have someone who's a stakeholder speak on it, which Lane Kiffin is often like, it's like he's like the best unconventional coach. You know what I'm saying? Like he's like there are plenty of coaches who would say weird stuff like this, but they would never be in a position where it would matter for them. Outside of maybe like a Dabo who will give a quote that you're just like, all right, man, and nobody actually really cares at this point. So I'll say that, like, I think Lane, to your point, a little bit of gamesmanship. I always love that, unless it's faking an injury. Still talking to you, Lane. Number 2, it's he's making a logical point and he's being real. I don't like coach speak, so I like some of the stuff Lane says. On the other side, I want to make kind of a related but unrelated point. Are we to assume that the SEC is going to stay this way, i.e. lots of 2-loss teams, complete parity NFL-style divisions? Or are we to assume, think about this, most of our lives as SEC fans, it was pretty clear there were 2 or 3 teams that could make the SEC championship game. And what I'm more worried about going forward with something like this would be 2 teams playing 3 times in the same season. So if we were to
I predicted with Georgia and Texas this year.
Yep. Exactly. And we've seen it, you know what I'm saying? Like as far as the Florida teams, Urban Meyer against Alabama, those teams would have played 3 times, because if they played in the regular season, they obviously didn't back then, but like now if they were to play in the regular season, they would play in the conference championship and in the postseason. Okay. We've seen Georgia and Alabama play in the regular season. We've seen, that type of stuff. So I think that what becomes an issue, and this is what I'm getting back around to, let's say we have a typical quote unquote 2010s year where we have like a Georgia and an Alabama, and they're both like 0-1 loss teams, and they have a great matchup. In the that'd be divisionless. Okay, let's do 2011. I think that's an easy way to do it. LSU, Alabama. LSU wins at home. Let's say we do divisionless. Okay, they have a rematch in the SEC championship. Let's say Alabama wins that game. Radical thought. Okay. Well, now let's say you get some random other SEC team, like Georgia or whoever was also good that year, right? And they sneak through the playoff. And that's more of what I'm worried about. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it literally would have happened most years where it's like, oh, you have this team that didn't have to play in the SEC championship. They might have played one or neither of these teams, and now they get to play Indiana and then like Iowa or somebody in the next round, and they're just in the Final Four.
Well, I mean, an expanded playoff, like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to have teams that don't play in a conference championship who make runs in the college football playoff. That's fine. You've opened up the door for that to happen. I'm not resisting that. I think that's an entirely different conversation. I think the more concerning thing is having teams that legitimately are posturing late in the season and doing the exact thing that people feared could happen in the 12-team playoff era, which is this is blah, blah, blah. This shouldn't matter. We need to actually lose a game like this so that we don't end up playing in a conference championship. That even if that's a conversation for the integrity of this sport, that is so bad. It is so unbelievably bad that all the selection committee has to do. This is all I'm asking. Okay, I'm not asking for the selection committee to get wild and have some radical way to approach this. But you're already potentially, it's at least on the table that you might have to approach this for Army Navy, a game that's being played after the selection committee will make its final field of 12.
That's the funniest wrinkle ever, by the way. Good catch there. Yep.
If Army can can somehow beat Notre Dame, this would be a scenario that they would actually have to approach. All the selection committee has to do is say, hey, let's reward the winner, the winner of the whatever conference championship game, all right, and make this a true reward instead of one additional test for a team that you yourselves have already admitted is worthy because they're ranked ahead of idle teams. Again, this is different than the 14 playoff era because you are rewarding, going in, you are going to be rewarding teams that are not going to be playing in a conference championship. And that is okay, all right? But there is still an unbelievable precedent to set here. If you all of a sudden drop that team out of the top 12 or top 11, I guess it could be, just because it plays in a conference championship game and loses. If you're sitting there at number 8 all of a sudden, and you're at number 8 going into conference championship, and then you suffer that third loss, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I guess you're number 13 now, and these teams that weren't in there get to move ahead of you because you lost this game, that would be a really bad precedent to set, okay?
Yep.
And I get it. Like, there will be an eye test thing. What happens if you lose by 56 points? I still wouldn't even be crazy about that. I don't like that. I really don't. Okay. The only exception that I would say that scenario is fine if a team that would be in the field going into conference championship weekend gets passed up is if like the number 11 team going into conference championship weekend loses a conference title game and they fall because you have to put a conference champ in that was outside of that top 11 because they're going to be earning automatic bids by virtue of winning their conference. So does that all kind of make sense? I realize that's not directly related to this game, but it is kind of a thought. And for those who are just watching the breakdown of Ole Miss and Florida, I know we're going to get to the game in a second, I promise here, but this is obviously a huge headline in college football. And it's a real defining moment, I think, early on with the 12-team playoff.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And you've heard me, like, probably to the point where you're like getting tired of hearing me say this, but like the brand value shouldn't matter, right? And we've even seen like 2014 was the famous example where it was TCU and Baylor and they both got hopped by Ohio State or whatever. And it's like the thing that's so maddening about this stuff is that we've seen the committee go one way for like most of the season. And then in the last second go, I like this team. And in that case, it worked for them. Obviously, Ohio State just happened to be superheroes at that point in their season. But point being, like, it's all about the road, right? We don't want to have inconsistent roads. I know that like it's almost like we're backing into the problem we tried to fix, which is, okay, you get Notre Dame, great example, 2018. Oh, this team hadn't played anybody, they're going to get in. Okay, cool. And then you have this battle-tested SEC team that's been through all this stuff. So it's that we start off with the BCS or the AP and split national titles, and we need clarity. And we end with, like, some of these SEC teams playing an extra SEC game against a great team, and possibly getting a bye, possibly getting other stuff. But, yeah, so I think that's it. So we're trying to push for fairness at a time when, as we're learning, sports just are fundamentally not really fair.
Yeah. Very, very true. In a lot of different ways. A lot of different ways to interpret that. The good news for Lane's wish, Ole Miss won't get into the SEC championship unless it beats Florida and Mississippi State. Plus, they would need all of these following things to happen. They would need A&M to lose to both Auburn and Texas. Okay, not crazy. We're gonna get to the A&M-Auburn game, a very small spread on that one, and then I would expect, depending on how that goes, A&M could be an underdog for that game against Texas. Would also need Alabama to lose to Oklahoma or Auburn, so Alabama can't run the table, and then would need Tennessee to lose to Vandy. All of those things would have to happen. That's essentially the parlay that Ole Miss would have to hit to play in an SEC championship, make it to Atlanta for the very first time in program history. I'm not sure what those odds are. It's a long shot. It's a long shot for all those things to hit. By the way, if you're looking for scenario breakdowns to waste an afternoon or something like that, and you want to just draw up every possible scenario, bball.notnothing.net.
Okay.
That is the site. I bookmarked it the other day. I spent an entire morning on it. I did an entire rooting guide for SEC contenders. bball.notnothing.net.
Okay.
And you can click on every possible scenario, and it will sim it out of who goes to the SEC championship, who doesn't. And you can do this for all the conferences, by the way. Yeah. It is fantastic. C. Wright told me about it the other day, and I was a little bit skeptical at first, and you kind of look at the website and wonder if this is made in 2004, and then you very quickly realize, oh no, this is a really good resource, and can really help kind of figure out what all this is going to look like over the course of the next 2 weeks. So Ole Miss in a very favorable spot to avoid the issue that Lane brought up. Is it in a favorable spot to win this game? debatable. Kind of a full circle game for Lane in a few ways. This was the team this is the Florida team that he made his Ole Miss debut against. You know, they lost that game in Oxford 51-35. It was a fun back and forth game, kind of a microcosm of that 2020 defenseless season that we saw. Mm-hmm. That was one of 3 times that year that Ole Miss lost while hitting 35 points. In his first 3 seasons at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin's teams lost 10 games when it hit 21 points. In 2 years with Pete Golding as his DC, Ole Miss is 18-1 when it hits 21 points. And again, that loss was a game, Death Valley at night a few weeks ago. LSU had 1 touchdown in the first 59 minutes. Different story after that, but pretty impressive. This is also for Lane Kiffin, the job that many wondered, myself included, if he would leave for. Mm-hmm. If you do want to show that you're at a different place with your program, you avoid a catastrophe loss like this. And I don't say catastrophe to disrespect Florida, who has played much harder in the second half of this season and is obviously coming off of what I dubbed the biggest win of the Billy Napier era. Don't mean any disrespect to Florida, but I mean catastrophic from a standpoint of you got over the hump against Georgia. Your path to the playoff is win these 2 games as at least 9-point favorite. You will be, if you are the program that has turned the corner, you don't lose a game like this. I am really encouraged by what we saw from the Florida defense last week, what they did against LSU. They could have more success dialing up pressure against an Ole Miss offensive line that's been up and down this year. Some good moments, some not as good moments. I think this could end up being a 1-score game that Lane's got to sweat out. I could definitely see that happening. But I'm going to say the return of Trey Harris, who is expected back for this one, finally. He's still, I think, leading the SEC in receiving. He's a Biletnikoff Award finalist, even though he hasn't played in a month. Unbelievable. I think his return is going to be
honestly.
He's been awesome. And what he did in the first part of the season, his body of work obviously has aged pretty darn well when you consider how tough it's been to catch up to him. So I'm going to say that he plays a big part in Ole Miss victory. Ole Miss wins 28-21.
Yeah, there are kind of 2 likely outcomes here, each of which would be hilarious. Outcome number 1 would be Ole Miss wins going away, which would be like 9-point spread is about, that's like 10.5-point spread. That's going to be, 2 possessions, like controlling the game. So one of the funny outcomes would be Florida kind of getting smoked by Texas, beating LSU pretty comfortably, and then getting smoked by Ole Miss. I think that would actually be the funniest Brian Kelly outcome, i.e. just for the SEC. The other super funny outcome would be Billy Napier upsetting Lane Kiffin after, the vote of confidence, after all this stuff. And so I think that either way, this game was one that I scheduled or that I circled very early as you did. It's not like that was some breaking brilliant thing. But at the same time, we said, okay, by this game, I think you're going to kind of know what's going on with Florida. And we do. Billy's coming back. I think that ship has kind of sailed for this season. I don't think there's really an amount that Lane Kiffin could run up the score that's going to make him Florida's next coach next year. But you agree with that?
Yeah, I think Billy Napier's the vote of confidence is staying true. I think especially beating LSU. Mm-hmm. And unless they puke on their shoes these last 2 weeks and they have decommitments left and right, and it's just a disaster and guys are just leaving out of the portal. No, I don't think anything's going to change with that.
Yes. And this is a kind of a petty off between coaches that we've seen to be petty, right? Unfortunately, we haven't got to see that much of Billy Napier's personality, which is he's a pretty funny guy, because he's been struggling so much and he's smart enough in the SEC to, he'll give you the stuff about, good weight and stuff, but he's not going to go out there and do the Lane Kiffin, and so I think this is a game that both coaches are going to take kind of personally. And so saying that, I have Ole Miss winning pretty big. I'm gonna say Ole Miss kind of follows a similar script to Texas. The apparatus, I think, is less successful against that D-line than LSU's. It's still so embarrassing that LSU couldn't figure that out. That's kind of my thing, is this Ole Miss D-line against the quarterback like that, that's a little bit of a problem. It's
a bad defensive line to have a lower body apparatus limiting your mobility against. And I'm assuming DJ Lagway is going to still be wearing that. As far as I know, that's going to be the case the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. You need your mobility, and he could still be mobile within the pocket. We gushed about that throw that he had to Eli Badger last week. That was just, oh my God, put that at the top of every DJ Lagway highlight reel. And I am excited to see a full game of him against a really good defense. Obviously, he gets hurt late in the first half against Georgia, a first half in which, I mean, let's be honest, it was the one splash play, and that was pretty much it to that point. But Florida was still at least a little bit more competent offensively. He's unable to play in the Texas game, of course. So hopefully this is going to be DJ Lagway for 60 minutes against an elite defense. And that in itself is very interesting moving forward in what that means for him and his future. But you're right. I think the mobility being limited, this is a tough matchup for him, and it's a little bit more of an offensive struggle for him to be able to hit on some of those splash plays.
Yeah, I'm with you real quick. I think that, at home, getting the juices going, LSU is sure to be thin, especially on defense. So when you kind of have that juice, funny enough, kind of the way that Florida did, we talked about it in the game against Utah, where they had the juice for a game. That's how it felt against LSU, where LSU was unable to really get through, didn't force turnovers, didn't have bad sacks. And I think that Ole Miss is already, they're hitting their stride at the right time. And I do think Ole Miss is going to play pretty well here now. Again, would be kind of funny if they did.
Things would definitely be shaken up in a hurry. And there would be a lot of people pointing to Lane saying, hey, good news for Lane. Don't have to worry about playing in an SEC championship.
No playoff for you, buddy.
Yeah, congratulations. All right, Kentucky, number 3, Texas. Texas, 20.5-point favorite for this one. The over-under I have is 2 references to Kentucky's Ole Miss win. Got to bring it up. Got to continue to bring it up. You have to bring it up every time that Kentucky plays one of these tough road games because it makes it seem like they have a chance. And maybe they kind of do. Maybe they kind of do for this reason. Fought well at Tennessee as well. For whatever reason, top 10 teams have brought out the best for Kentucky football this year. The Georgia game went down to the wire, won at Ole Miss. It was a 3-point game with 5 minutes left at Tennessee. Okay. And yeah, Tennessee felt like it was kind of in control of that one, but still, Kentucky's 3 best games against SEC competition were against top 10 teams in the country. So can they make it a 4th? I think that's possible.
Such a funny but true. Yeah, good point.
Just as wild as that might sound for how frustrating a year this has been for Kentucky. 3-touchdown spread. We know that A&M is on deck for Texas. I'm not saying that Sark is going to save all the good plays. He's got more than enough good plays in his arsenal to make sure that some of them are on display against Kentucky as well. Okay, he's not naive enough to think they're just going to run the ball through the A gap and that's how you're going to find your way to somehow win a game like this. All right, we know that at the same time, as good as Texas has been, as in control as they have felt for a lot of this season, playing with a lead and kind of always feeling like, all right, yeah, maybe we're going to turn the ball over early or something like that, but we trust our defense. We trust Quinn Ewers to kind of figure things out. They've just kind of felt like a team in control. We also know that Texas's offense really only had one SEC game in which it went off. And that was, I think, the Florida game when the Gators were very clearly overmatched. I think they were missing 3. Yeah, they were missing 3 starters from their defensive backfield. They were very injury riddled in that game. And if you're scoreboard watching and you want to tell me, the Texas offense went off against Oklahoma.
It was a quarterback thing with Texas too.
Wait, say it again.
But the Florida's quarterback situation was just very fluid and weird. That was like the LA situation we were joking about. So if you can't move the ball, eventually your defense is just gonna be like, all right, guys.
yeah, and they very much were dominant in that one, pretty much in every possible way. But if you're telling me the Oklahoma game was also dominant for the Texas offense,
same situation exactly. Wow,
different because it took Texas longer to get going. Texas was up 7-3 with 2.5 minutes left in the first half. So let's kind of be honest with who this Texas offense has been. I'm definitely taking Kentucky to cover. Okay?
Oh, yeah. And my point there is they leaned on them. Like, the Texas just leaned on Oklahoma because they knew their offense couldn't keep up. And when the dam broke, it was over. Same deal as Florida. It's like, yeah, because they got the pick to start the game, and Oklahoma's offense played okay, but Texas was just sitting there going, you guys got to play offense against PK,
Yeah. And that, for most teams, has not been a very good formula. It really hasn't. Even Georgia, it was a really tough sledding for a good chunk of that day against that Texas defense. I think Kentucky's done some things better in the run game that make me think that they can at least have 2 scoring drives on the road, even against Texas in this top-ranked defense in terms of yards per play allowed. But I'll say this is kind of another one of those ho-hum Texas wins. I'm going to say 24-10 Texas. too much of that Texas pass rush getting in the ear of Brock Vandegrift. Another big day for Colin Simmons, who, if that guy hasn't already clinched freshman All-America honors, I'll be stunned. Needs to be in the All-SEC conversation with the things that he has done. The 5-star freshman has just been so fun to watch. This is a big-time matchup for him. Very favorable spot with those Kentucky tackles, how much they have struggled at times. But by the way, just in case we need to have the stakes laid out for this one, Kentucky lost. That would mean missing a bowl game for the first time since 2015. Their bowl game will be against Louisville, kind of either way. We know how Mark Stoops loves to get up for that one. A Texas win would mean 10 wins in consecutive seasons for the first time since 2008, 2009.
Wow.
Not quite willing to say yet Texas is back, but returning and very close to being back if things happen over the course of the next month.
Yeah, I think that's okay. Wait, Texas makes the SEC championship. Are they back?
You know what? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes because that would mean you're the only one-loss team in the SEC.
You're making the playoff if you make the SEC championship game as Texas,
yes.
Pretty much. Unless you just there would be no way to do one and not the other because of the tiebreaker with A&M. So you couldn't really be a 2-loss team. Anyway, yeah. So I mean,
unless they lose to Kentucky and then beat A&M. That would be
right. Yeah, that would be funny. But yeah, this is kind of an interesting one to me because exactly to your point, like something has to give here. And, as I keep predicting or thinking that Texas is going to break these games open, right? And it gave, even you could technically say they got hot late against Vandy, but again, the defense is turning an offense, right? Now that's something that can be had against Kentucky for sure. Their quarterback situation is awful. It's also not been great. Their defense has been inconsistent in ways that have become more accepted in the last 2 to 3 years under Stoops, but something you wouldn't often see under Stoops. But there's just something a little bit off about Texas offense. Exactly what you just said. It's, we talked about Quinn Ewers and the accuracy thing, the new receivers, whatever it would be. But when Kentucky is, playing well, they are shortening the game and they are running the ball, doing all that stuff. I think that Texas's O-line is up to the challenge of Kentucky's D-line, which has often been something that's in the Ole Miss game, their D-line played really well. And I think that, at the end of the day, I think Sark has just kind of proven that he can get out of these, squirrel his way out of these situations, unless it's the Georgia game, which who among us, right? And so, yeah, point being, I think Texas should be a little bit more recession-proof here because I think that Sark has become real about the limitations of his team. Whereas a Lane Kiffin at times, the way he lost to Kentucky was very, but we're Ole Miss and we're going to go out there and figure this out. And
I agree.
Not today, Hoss.
Yeah, I think Sark is better. It has a better feel for what his offense kind of needs in those moments and what Ewers needs to kind of get going and some of those quick hitting type things. And Sark always talks about, if I can get Quinn in a rhythm, man, he all of a sudden it's just lethal. And it's kind of what he did in that Vandy game where it was 18 consecutive completions that he had after that really bad start. And a lot of that is scheme. A lot of that is Sark being able to kind of find those right ways to know the types of throws that he's going to be able to make and have success, as opposed to, I need to try and take 3 consecutive deep shots with a deep ball that's just really not been there this year. We've talked about that on a weekly basis. I don't know that the deep ball gets going in this one. I don't know that the deep ball needs to get going in this one.
I think it's partially how Lane got in trouble too.
Yeah.
It was just always trying to hit the home run. Just get 4 yards of carry and get out of there.
Yeah. And against Kentucky, sometimes it's a little bit of a tougher thing to do. It just kind of is. So interesting test for Texas. If you're a championship caliber program, you take care of business in a game like this. And again, I don't think Texas is ultimately worried about style points when you continue to see Texas ranked number 3 in the country with that resume that still does not have a win against the CFP top 25. I still think that Texas is in good enough position where just take care of business. And right now you can default to, we have put ourselves in a nice spot to at least get an at-large berth in the college football playoff. Maybe that berth will be all but clinched if they win this game against Kentucky. All right. Number 23, Mizzou. Yeah, that's right. Mizzou still ranked. How about that? 7.5 point favorites against Mississippi State. The over-under I have is 3 references to playing for pride. Yeah. Could apply that to both sides. Not a big spread in this one. Basically touchdown spread. I know we got the hook there as well. Will, Mizzou is minus 55 in SEC play. That's scoring margin. Okay. Minus 55. Yet at the same time, Mizzou can still have a 10-win season. If it wins out, would have to win the bowl game as well.
Mm-hmm.
I went back the last 15 years and tried to find any SEC team that won 10 games but had a negative point differential in conference play. That's what I did with my Wednesday afternoon.
Heck
Here
yeah.
here are the closest that I could find to that in those 15 years. All right. 2008 Georgia won 10 games and was +1 in SEC play. How about that? 2018 Florida won 10 games, was +4 in SEC play. 2018 Kentucky, historic breakthrough season for Mark Stoops, won 10 games, was +14 in SEC play. 2022 LSU, how about that? Won 10 games, was +16 in SEC play. 2021 Ole Miss won 10 games, was +22 in SEC play. 2021 Kentucky won 10 games, and it was +24 in SEC play. In 2015 Georgia, the last year of the Mark Richt era, they won 10 games that year, and they were +24 in SEC play as well. So, got to go back further than 15 years. I finally got to 2007 Tennessee.
Sorry, I bumped into the mic. I didn't mean to do that, but I'm like, heck yeah, we did. I'm like, I hope it didn't stop there. I'm so locked in.
Come on, you think I'm just gonna stop? I just had to frame it as, yeah, this hasn't happened in the last 15 years.
I guess we'll never know. Psych.
Yeah, I originally did playoff era, and I'm like, no, we got to keep going. 2007 Tennessee, that team won 10 games, -3 in SEC play, played an SEC championship, of course, against LSU. How fitting that the 2007 season yielded that. Of course it did. Why wouldn't it? Maybe Tennessee fans would disagree with this take because obviously that Tennessee team got walloped by Florida, got walloped by Alabama, year one of the Saban era, but they still beat 2 top 15 teams that year, played an SEC championship. I wouldn't call that Tennessee season in 2007 a hollow season. Do I need to explain kind of what I've referenced that before, what I think is a hollow season? South Carolina is doing the opposite right now of a hollow type season. Big, impactful wins,
right,
move the needle type wins, as opposed to kind of empty calorie type victories and getting blown out in the games that we feel like actually matter. Okay?
I'm not going to tell you which coach is known for that, but we watched him at a certain conference list school for most of our lives.
Do his initials resemble a certain fast food chain that isn't McDonald's?
Yes, and okay. I know exactly what you're talking about with a hollow season. Go ahead.
Home of the Whopper. All right. Mizzou is a chance for a historically hollow 10-win season. That's what I'm getting at here. A negative scoring margin in conference play feels very likely unless they win these next 2 games by an average of 4 touchdowns. Because they're -55 in SEC play. Only win for Mizzou this year against a team that was ranked at the time of the matchup was at home against number 24 Boston College. That was back in September. Boston College, by the way, in case you haven't checked up on Bill O'Brien's team, they're now 5-5. They're fighting for bowl eligibility. Only win for Mizzou against a core 4 team that currently has a winning record was against 6-4 Vandy. And that was in double OT, and not enjoyable 1% for the Mizzou faithful because at the time, the idea of Vandy beating a top 10 team was insane, and we thought we would never see that. Little did we know. In 3 games against teams currently ranked in the CFP top 25, Mizzou got blown out twice, and it lost once last week, devastating fashion in South Carolina. Here's what I'm getting at. I don't know how many times this season Mizzou has truly felt good. You know, that's I hate to always use the word vibe because I know I overuse it. Okay, don't give me a 1-star review saying that I overuse the word vibe. If someone's ever done that, delete it. That's mean. But I think that matters to 18 to 22-year-old kids feeling good in a given week and just feeling like, we did what we set out to do. Our fan base feels good. We're going to have a fun week of practice. This isn't going to suck. We're not going to have to hear about it from students passing by. We're going to feel like we're actually living up to expectations. With all the mind games that Drink has been playing with his team this year, he has.
Sorry, I just got reminded of the A&M game. That's just so funny.
The blanket that Drink had a staffer definitely send that blanket. There's no doubt whatsoever. To his own player, to Theo Weiss. I wonder what buttons he has left to push. I do. Road game in Starkville. Will, I'm calling for the upset. I'm going to say Michael Van Buren has himself a whale of a day, a week removed from Lenora Sellers, kind of going off against this Mizzou defense. I'm going to say coming off the bye week, Jeff Lebby gets to celebrate his first SEC win, 35-31 Mississippi State. And this would basically make everything I said about Mizzou having a 10-win season useless and impossible.
I'm right there with you, buddy. I was sitting here looking at this game like this is a classic Mizzou loss.
About it.
I am right there with you. I thought I was going to be, because I tried to not scroll down to your predictions. Like I thought I was going to be the guy who said it. But again, I go back to the Florida game last year where it's like, all you have to do is just comfortably beat a bad team. And it's like, we've seen the all you have to do is comfortably beat a bad team several times from Mizzou. It's
Graham Mertz even got hurt at the end of that game too, and they still had to just fight like tooth and nail to had the big fourth down conversion late in that one just to be able to win it.
Yeah, so like that's kind of my thing is it's like, okay, we've had the game last week that was a heartbreaking game. Like we talked about this with Florida getting up for a game. It's like that game was such an emotional toll because, okay, you had a game that you were fighting for, you lost it before halftime, you came all the way back, and then you lost it again. So like I've joked about, like the getting blown out actually isn't that bad sometimes because you just move on to the next week. But that one, they were locked in until the last play after having kind of had like gaslight themselves into believing. And that's kind of what happens when you don't have, like when you're gaslighting your players about like blankets and stuff, like everything is just random, on the drink staff, because it's like, we talked about ad nauseum, the 1-score games from last year. The Kansas State game last year is a game they lose this year, right? We talked about even the Alabama game is a game they might have won last year that they had no shot in this year. So, yeah, I think that Mississippi State, led by Michael Van Buren, and when you talk about those teams, right, that you just listed that had kind of like the tiering, you could pick out a specific game or two in each of those teams and go, oh, yeah, this was pretty bad. And Mizzou already has 2 of those games against Alabama and A&M. And so, like, all they're missing is just that upset to set the record straight, to equalize the win total.
I think, too, and people are definitely fair to point out, you talk about wanting to feel good. When has Mississippi State felt good this year? I mean, obviously, It's been a really, really rough year zero. I know coaches hate it when you call it a year zero, but it has felt like a year zero for that team. Mm-hmm. And I understand that fully. I also think there's a lot of we need to try and we're still trying to fight for jobs for next year as well. And I'm not saying I don't think Mississippi State is going to have some mass exodus in the portal like it has the last 2 years. So you're trying to fight just to be able to show I'm good enough to be able to go into the offseason feeling like I have a case for a starting job. I think that'll be at play. I think Mississippi State has kind of already accepted who it is at this point. And I wonder if Mizzou just doesn't come out with the right mindset. And I think in a game like this, maybe they get bit a little bit from it. And this ends up being just a tough to stomach loss for Drink.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you.
All right, let's go to number 7, Alabama, 13.5-point favorites against Oklahoma. The over-under I have is 2 references to Jackson Arnold being named a captain for this one. A lot of talk in Norman about that this week. Very, very popular topic of conversation about a guy being named a captain. Does that mean, and here's why it is, okay? So some of it's justified, some of it's not.
Because who else would you name? That's kind of my question, is like, who started all the other games? If we're going to bench a guy and say he can't be a captain, then that's everybody.
This kind of makes you it kind of makes you wonder, what are the situations when we don't talk about, why don't we talk about captain stuff every single week? Probably because usually it's just a ho-hum batch of captains, but we always reference the guys who aren't named captains and why that's a big deal. Shout out to the Connor Cook draft conversation. Who could possibly forget that? The Jackson Arnold captain thing can be seen by some as this coaching staff still believes in him. This coaching staff wants him back next year. That's what they're still trying to figure out, okay? I would not say it's a certainty by any stretch of the imagination that Jackson Arnold is back at Oklahoma next year. I do believe him when he says, I'm taking this week by week. There is a really good chance that whoever Brent Venables hires to be his next OC, his most important assistant hire, I think they will want to handpick their quarterback. Maybe that's Jackson Arnold, maybe that's not. I'll tell you what. Brent Venables is certainly showing much more confidence by naming him a captain. Okay, there's a lot more "I believe in you, kid" than when he benched him in the first half of his SEC debut. Okay, does that matter? Does it matter that your defensive-minded head coach is finally showing some confidence in you? I have a tough time saying that it matters that much. I think Jackson Arnold's digging from within with this. Okay. Oklahoma's last home win against FBS competition was week 3 against Tulane. By the way, Tulane, number 20 in the playoff poll.
I know.
Nice little season. John Summerall, very good coach, some would say. That means that Oklahoma has more wins against the current CFP top 25 than Texas. OU greater than sign Texas. That's what people are saying. More relevant for this game. Take away the defensive scores. Oklahoma's offense has 8 touchdowns in 6 SEC games. It gets worse. Okay. Even if you want to leave the defensive scoring in there, which you shouldn't if you're trying to evaluate an offense, Oklahoma is averaging 15.2 points per SEC game this year. That is 124th in FBS if you're just doing the breakdown of points per conference game. Nobody in America has allowed more sacks in conference play than Oklahoma. And nobody in America is averaging fewer yards per play against conference foes than Oklahoma at 3.97. That's not even good enough for Marcus Satterfield. What's he up to? Basura.
Like, I want to laugh, but I really can't because of the amount of injuries. That's the thing. Like, I try to be fair. It's like, I don't even know if this, I know this offense isn't good, but I don't know how bad it is because, again, okay.
New offensive line every week.
Yeah.
Which top 5 receivers playing, which one isn't, which quarterback are we going to? It's a mess. And absolute. I mean, even, they've been banged up in the backfield as well. What position on Oklahoma's offense hasn't endured significant change in season? I mean, they changed coordinators in season 2. Tight end position, I think that's it. Maybe. I mean, it's been bad. It's been really bad. And look, the results are what they are. Okay. And I understand that Oklahoma has endured a lot of injuries and has not been fortunate with injury luck, but it has not been a great answer to the whole, are you SEC ready question? Okay. Is Oklahoma ready for Bama's defense? I highly doubt it. Bama's defense, since the Vandy loss, has been much more consistent. Subtract the bad Milroe safety from the South Carolina game, and Bama's defense is allowing 13.4 points per game in its last 5 games. And in that stretch, nobody has more than 24 points against Bama's defense if you, again, take away the safety. Bama's had 5 consecutive games forcing at least 3 turnovers. It's a bad matchup for Oklahoma's offense, man. A really bad matchup. If Alabama comes in there and doesn't just shoot itself in the foot with penalties, which I realize is certainly possible, but this has not been the type of offense that forces you into those penalties. It's not the type of offense that's going to go full Diego Pavia and convert 3rd down after 3rd down and just make Malachi Moore lose his freaking mind. That's the problem. Would you expect to see some fight from Oklahoma? Yes, I would. And I don't think it's a given that Bama's offense looks invincible in this hostile atmosphere at night. It should still be a hostile atmosphere, even though this has been obviously a disastrous season by Oklahoma's unbelievably high standard. But I'm going to say too much Bama. 31-14. Tied. Maybe don't roll from start to finish, but second half, it's pretty much never in doubt that Alabama's winning this football game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We just talked about the Texas game where their offense kind of couldn't get going, and they eventually just kind of got suffocated. And I think that's something that, listen, guys, when you're not on the same page, it's really hard to tackle Jalen Milroe.
How would you know that, Will? How would you know that? Did you witness anything like that?
Yeah, I think you could call me a firsthand account of that at this point. I saw it live.
Who had a better seat, you or fake Mike the Tiger?
Definitely fake Mike the Tiger.
Okay.
Definitely him. So not the most traumatized for sure. But God, I always think about Omar the Tiger when I think about how hard that Saturday was for me. But anyway, so point being, again, it's the Texas script. It's the fact of, okay, yeah, sick, Billy Bowman pick. Oh my gosh, your defense is one of the best in the SEC. You played awesome. Okay. But how many times are they prepared to tackle Jalen Milroe? Because that number could be 20, it could be 25, it could be 30, as we've seen. And they might never need to do that, if the offense can't get going. Because one thing about the old swarm defense is they could definitely cause chaos. They could definitely create turnovers. And they could definitely create negative plays. Actually, this defense is kind of the worst matchup for an offense like Oklahoma's in the SEC because they sell out and bring pressure and they sell out and cause chaos. And if you have offensive linemen who are like, oh, yeah, dude, sorry, what's your Instagram? What's your real name? Not good.
If you're a sicko and you're looking for a little bit of gambling, props and stuff like that, finding some way to parlay like Oklahoma money line with a Billy Bowman touchdown is a fun bet because Oklahoma ain't winning this game unless you get some sort of Billy Bowman touchdown.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy is just Johnny on the spot. Talk about nose for the football. Drink every time you hear someone say ball hawk about Billy Bowman with his NFL draft stock. Even in that Mizzou game, I mean, my gosh, seriously, go back and watch that hit that he had on Luther Burden. That was one of the biggest hits I've seen all year, and it's such a key spot. Billy Bowman's great. Unfortunately for Oklahoma, they need a whole lot more Billy Bowmans to be able to win a game like this.
Facts.
If you're wondering, Bama's SEC championship path basically just needs chalk to play out.
It's so easy for them to this point. Yeah.
Yeah, like if Bama wins these final 2 games, I think it'll have an automatic spot. All I hope for is that the SEC won't announce a conference title bid 3 days after it's clinched, like the Big Ten did with Oregon. If the SEC can just avoid doing that with all these tiebreaker scenarios, the SEC will have shown that it's the better conference than the Big Ten. That's pretty undeniable at this point. That was so funny seeing that on Tuesday. Oh, God. That's how we know we're too far in, man.
There's a rage quotient. There's a rage economy going on where it's like no matter what happens, everyone's like, oh, this is unfair to my specific interest. But I am on the IMRED. What is this? B-ball not nothing that you sent me that looks like it's in 2004. And I have fully confirmed that all ever has to do is beat Oklahoma. And then what appears to be Auburn on the road. So that should be pretty easy. But that is
Auburn.
pretty easy.
Well, that game's in Tuscaloosa.
Oh, never mind. Okay, this is laid out weird then because it doesn't have home and away consistently. But yeah, okay,
I think it has favorites listed first.
There we go. Okay, there we go. Easy. So yeah, it's Bama either time. So point being, yeah, their road is now pretty easy because if it's in Tuscaloosa, you're so right.
Yeah. All right, number 15, Texas A&M, 2.5-point favorites against Auburn. The over-under I have is one flashback to the most significant feeling game ever played between a pair of 5 and 7 teams. That was the last time these teams played at Jordan-Hare. Mm-hmm. It was, in many ways, in my opinion, the perfect it just means more game, okay, in a lot of different ways. And I think you had to experience it. That's one of those you had to be present to watch it, even if you're just watching the replay. The full excitement of that night and what it meant for Cadillac to win that game, that 13-10 rock fight. I think you had to have been present to think that this is even possible in any sort of way. But here's the question.
Okay.
That win that night 2 years ago against A&M, wherein Cadillac is there, it's swag surfing, it's all the above, the single most underrated rap song of the 21st century. Mm-hmm. It's not the best win for Auburn in the 2020s, but is that Auburn's best football moment of the 2020s?
Oh, man, of the 2020s. I mean, honestly, this sounds whatever, but I feel like the overtime game against Bama was probably right there when they lost it.
But they lost, and which one? Which overtime game?
Oh,
no,
man.
only one overtime game. Overtime game. Gravedigger was not an overtime game. My bad.
Yeah. But you're right. I think it's a win. Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and again, not the best win. 2021 against the top 10 Ole Miss team. That was the best win that Auburn's had in the 2020s. That was also the last time that Auburn beat a Power 5 team that finished with a winning record. Still trying to overcome that. TBD on if that'll happen this year. Definitely, unless Kentucky would have to win out in order for that to happen. So still going to be fighting for that in these last 2 games. But yeah, I mean, go back to 2020, you had the reduced crowds. So I don't think any game from that season would qualify. 2019 Iron Bowl, that was a better moment because obviously it's the Iron Bowl, but that's the 2010s that we're talking about. I just think that given how eager Auburn was to rid of the stench of the Brian Harsin era, I just think that is the best Auburn football moment of the 2020s. And maybe I'd have to ask Cole about that, but he was obviously there for that.
Oh my gosh. You know what, man? I forgot one. Bo Nix sure did smoke LSU.
2021. I thought about that as well. That the best play of Bo Nix's career was that night, wherein he burned, I think, 500 calories on one scramble and touchdown toss. I believe he threw that to Jake Fromm's brother, if I'm not mistaken, Tyler Fromm.
I think I do remember. Yeah, that was I remember I was at a wedding for that, and I was like, yeah. So I do remember that. And the following Halloween, they also smoked LSU. So those are the two other.
Yeah, that was a big time moment. Yeah, you know what? And maybe because we don't get to see it as much, it's a little bit different if we're talking about the home crowd.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly a case to be made. Yeah, that game was very monumental. At least it felt like at the time. But yeah, spoiling A&M's SEC championship and playoff hopes by keeping bowl eligibility alive would have a chance to be maybe Auburn's best football moment of the 2020s, at least best football moment in the last couple of years. The odds makers certainly suggest there's a good chance of that happening. Very small spread. Would be interested if this spread stays less than a field goal. Seems like it could happen. Hugh Freeze's only power conference win at home since he took this job was last year against Mississippi State, who, in case you forgot, went 5-7. They fired Zach Arnett in the middle of his first and only season in Starkville. Two things could be true at the same time. We talked about this a lot, but it bears repeating, especially in a matchup like this.
I'm sorry for the YouTube audience. I'm not in a Twilight Zone episode. It looks like there's a gust of wind going through the autumn trees, and it's just putting an insane amount of light on my face. So, like, I'm not getting sucked away or anything. Continue.
If you are, just let me know. Just text me if you're getting sucked away. That's fine.
I'll text you. Yeah.
Happens to the best of us. Yeah, you're good. I think two things can be true at the same time. Maybe you'll disagree with this, but I think one is that Auburn fans are still awesome, and that crowd can absolutely turn water into wine. Okay. Perhaps more than any other crowd in college football, they can turn water into wine. I'm confident in that. The other thing is that Jordan-Hare magic, it's not exactly working with this team.
Yep.
And it's not an indictment of the fan base. It's just for whatever reason. Early on, you could point to the turnovers. Lately, turnovers actually haven't been that bad. You know, it's crazy to think. Auburn's last game with multiple turnovers was week 4 against Arkansas. You know, they've really taken care of the football better. They still have just found ways to lose games. And obviously the fourth quarter woes have surfaced all too many times. And you know what? I get that it's not technically a turnover to send out Towns Magoo for a 52-yard field goal, but it might as well be.
Yeah, I call that a turnover on Dawgs.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to take that off the record. That multiple turnovers in some of those games, definitely since week 4. The bad news for Auburn, A&M's defense, though it struggled at South Carolina in that electric atmosphere, I think they can torture Peyton Thorne. I really do. I expect that they'll do just that, and I think that that's going to overshadow probably a good defensive performance from Auburn. I would expect to see Auburn's defense to continue to play well. You look at the running numbers, the rushing numbers that they have allowed over the course of the last month or so, and you're like, dang, they are not quitting whatsoever. That has developed into a real strength of this team. By the way, this needs to be said. Let's all give Mike Elko a little bit of a break for his press conference slip up, Freudian slip of sorts that he had. If you missed it, he was asked about focusing on the task at hand and not looking ahead to Texas. And ironically enough, he ended that answer by saying, "Our focus is single-handedly on Texas. I mean Auburn." The man corrected himself, okay? We have slip-ups like that all the time in front of a microphone. It happens. So many times, I'll correct you, you'll correct me, and both of us, when we're in the wrong, we'll say, "What did I say?" It happens. It happens. Even as Will is about to get sucked into a black hole because of this white light that's over his face, it can happen, all right? Elko realized he did it in the moment, and that is not something that I do a lot. If I make a mistake, I'm just breezing right through it. I'm going on to the next thing. And it takes someone actually correcting me, usually. But I realize that's not going to stop Texas fans from saying rent free. I also realize that if A&M's playoff hopes and ICC championship hopes come to an end because of a loss to a 4-6 Auburn team, everyone will connect those dots and say, who in the world was A&M focused on? Because it didn't feel like Auburn. It felt like maybe they were a little bit too focused on Texas. That would be dumb, but I get it. That's the world that we live in. Aggies win this one 27-17.
You know, man, just because it's a little bit of cake week, I'm going to go ahead and pick a second upset here.
Ooh.
I think that, like, you know, this Auburn team, as we said ad nauseum, and you know what's funny, man? Like, you know, they had ULM last weekend. We saw them obviously lose to Vandy. So like, this is something I'm a little guilty of. I won't say that you are because you like got it right on every team, but like we have our like, let's call it, I don't know, 10 teams at the beginning of the year that we're like, okay, I need to know like a ton about these teams. And Auburn are just not fun to watch at all. So I'm like, I'm not even enjoying like them imploding in these games. And so
they're fun to watch against bad teams. I'll give them that. It's fun to watch Cam Coleman try to be covered by Louisiana Monroe corners, but then you think to yourself, why am I actually watching Cam Coleman against ULM corners? This doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and like as I look through this too, they don't really like hear me out here. Points wise, they don't have a lot of bad losses. Like they don't have a lot of blowout. Like you could make an argument that several good SEC teams have worse losses than Auburn when it comes to 6-point loss to Oklahoma. Yeah, you lost by 20 to Georgia, but who among us? That was actually kind of a close game at half. Okay, you lost by 4 to Mizzou. So like I'm not gonna say necessarily that they've been improving because in here we have like a massive 4-game losing streak, and you could you lost 5 of 6. Too. But at the same time, at some point, I truly feel like I've watched some of the most unqualified football staffs at Auburn find a way to compete with Alabama, Georgia, whoever. Hugh Freeze did that against Georgia a couple of years ago or like last year. So point being, like I think that this has to be that game. We talked about water finding their level in the last upset with Mizzou, where A&M also maybe has been running a little bit hot. I think the South Carolina game proved that. Again, the LSU game sure didn't. I get it. But at the same time, you have all this stuff ahead of you. You're a little bit ahead of schedule. And I see this as almost the version of that where it's like you got a first-year head coach. You're kind of in the driver's seat still for the SEC championship game. I think that this team is a little bit worse than their record, and these things always find a way to reveal themselves. And at the same time, we've talked about Hugh Freeze isn't really – I don't know. Is Hugh Freeze on the hot seat? I feel like I've just stopped thinking about that.
If I had to guess, I would say that he's, even if they lose these 2 games, which they're not expected to win in theory based on the spread, I would say that he still gets a year 3, $20.6 million, I believe is the buyout. I'm just trying to, that's off the top of my head. I'm not exactly sure if that's the final number of what it would be at the end of the regular season, but I don't believe that he will be fired. Never say never, especially with an AD that has already fired a year 2 coach. We don't need to name who that year 2 coach was. It was definitely Joe Moorhead. But at the same time, I think that he's probably safe in getting a year 3, even if they get waxed in these final 2 games.
I'm not going to go on the whole tangent here, but the thing that Joe Moorhead didn't have is the only thing Hugh Freeze have, which is just like folksy Southernism. It's actually kind of funny that could be.
How dare you? That man acclimated in every possible way to his Southern surroundings, and yet they still called him a Yankee, and they still had to drag his Yankee you-know-what out of there.
Literally, it's like that's kind of funny that I'm like, why is Hugh Freeze not getting fired? This is horrible compared to expectations, and it's just that everybody kind of knows him, and like your mom remembers him and stuff, so it's like, yeah, donors will be fine. Anyway, I say all of that to say, I feel like, Auburn could go into the offseason with more hopium. This is a game that they need to win for me to have any faith in Hugh Freeze going forward. I think that, we talked about they haven't had their Jordan Hare game this year. They're at Alabama, as you noted, that website 2004 layout. I apologize. Now, granted, the Auburn website just almost crashed my computer, so they're not doing much better. But point being, I think I think that ideally you want to win one of these last 2. I don't think it's in the cards for them to beat this Bama team. So A&M with kind of their lack of depth, vulnerability, stuff like that. I don't think that Auburn is a better team than A&M. I don't think they've shown that to any degree. But at some point, they got to win one of these weird Jordan Hare games that Hugh. That's the last thing to take away from an Auburn coach. Gus was great at it. Harsin had a couple and almost had a couple. It's like Hugh has totally just punted the only thing that making an Auburn like okay, you got to play Georgia and Alabama, but you get this crazy home field. He's like, I'll pass. I don't want that. I want to have Towns and Magoo out there. So yeah, I think this is going to be a like 3-point upset by Auburn.
Watch this end up being like a 200-yard game from Jarquez Hunter, and he just looks like he's just shot out of a cannon the entire night, and he's just fresh and looking incredibly good. And watch this just be a game that Auburn never looks like it's going to lose, and it feels similar to what South Carolina did to A&M a couple weeks ago. Right. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm on the record with a double-digit A&M win, but watch this be the thing that kind of shakes up the SEC picture down the stretch. For what it's worth, as a fan of college football, I want A&M to play against Texas next week with massive stakes, okay? So maybe there's part of me that wants to manifest that a bit. I am so looking forward to the return of that rivalry that there's definitely a part of me that's like, gosh, just get us to that game, with that game meaning everything for both of those teams. That would be a lot of fun. Certainly Auburn has a chance to disrupt that. All right. You ready to talk about Vandy and LSU? Let's do it, Will. LSU.
When you started off this by calling it Cake Week, I thought to myself, who is the cake in this game? And then I thought, I know the answer to that, don't I?
LSU is a 7.5-point favorite, though. So
that's barbecue chicken to Diego Pavia.
It might be. It might be. What's better, cake or the best type of barbecue chicken?
For me, barbecue chicken.
You're not a cake fan?
I like cake. I just, big barbecue chicken guy.
All right. I'm a big barbecue chicken guy. I still think cake has a higher ceiling. I think cake and ice, give me ice cream, like most times, 10 times out of 10. But the best piece of cake is going to be better than the best possible ice cream.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's I see you. I'm a big protein guy,
Wow, that was a meathead thing to say. How about it? Let's go. Mm-hmm. Speaking of meatheads, this LSU team could use some meatheads, Will. Maybe they need Garrett Nussmeier to just have a little bit more, let's call it poise, because that has obviously been lacking the last 3 games. The over-under is 6.5 yards per pass attempt for Nuss. Last 3 games, that is what he is averaging. 7 turnovers in his last 10 quarters of football. 5 picks, 2 strip sacks, fumbles as well. Mm-hmm. He had 6 turnovers in his first 30 quarters to start the season and 7 turnovers in his last 10 quarters. Not great. Bad time for regression in that department, when that was the biggest question with Nussmeier, not just coming into this season, but really for the last 3 years.
Overall.
Yeah, always. Some of that is on him. Some of that's probably on these LSU pass catchers as well. Nobody's innocent at that high of a turnover rate, okay? That's just not the case. When Vandy forces multiple turnovers this year, 3-1. Only loss when they forced multiple turnovers was a 3-point game against Texas. Can't turn the ball over and give Diego Pavia a short field. That's obvious. Diego Pavia was meant to play in Death Valley at night. Unfortunately, for us that would like to see peak Death Valley at night, the last 3 weeks have made me think we will not see peak Death Valley at night. I can't imagine this will be the most juiced up crowd that we have ever seen at LSU. I'm fascinated if Brian Kelly is going to make some bold decisions about benching star players after the way that he left things post-Florida. Kind of hinted that could be in the cards. We'll see. All right. It's not an easy thing to do at this stage of the year, especially as you're trying to avoid a losing season, which is still on the table for LSU. As crazy as that sounds, this team could still go 6-7.
Maybe real quick, what's funny about that? I felt kind of bad for being critical of LSU's upperclassmen in the last pod, but then we had the famous players
losers,
only meeting.
Losers.
Yeah, they agreed with me. They called a players only meeting. I'm vindicated. They didn't. They thought they were losers too. They said, you know what? Actually, this is time for us to take control of this team, and good for them. I agree with that mentality. That being said, Brian Kelly threatening to bench some underperforming upperclassmen. It's like, who's the guy, Harry Potter's cousin that they lived with, where they were like, okay,
Dursley.
no more cake. You've already had 6 pieces there. It's like, oh, wow, we're already at the end of year 3, and we're suddenly looking at benching guys that are old and not performing. Anyway.
Dudley.
Yep.
Dudleykins. Look, maybe he's just going to bench Caden Durham. Just take his anger out. It's like, hey, you're a freshman running back that's emerged in this offense. Go sit on the bench.
And Josh Williams had a drop last week because he was worried about you, son. So you need to go sit down.
Yeah, you're kind of shaking the dynamic of the room. I don't really like that. What you're doing here? You're like 19 years old. Let's just chill. I don't think he's going to do that, even with even with his dislocated toes. He did get 23 touches last week against Florida. But, well, here's what I wonder about. How bad would it have to be for Brian Kelly to lose his mind and bench a healthy Garrett Nussmeier? How bad?
I mean, I think at this point, it gives you the best chance to win because the offense is so weird and anemic. Like, you bring in a backup quarterback and they can't run the ball, then what do? Somebody's going to have these 40 pass attempts, 3
first half picks. Is that... I'm not saying this is imminent. I'm legitimately asking the question because I think there have been LSU fans that have wondered these last three games of what would it take, even if it's just a series, to sit him down. And he got taken out of the game for like 2 seconds because he got banged up at the very end, and AJ Swan comes in. AJ Swan, former team, revenge game. Brian Kelly is thinking, that's the juice I need to be able to battle back in this one. I saw A&M do it to my team. I'm going to do it to somebody else. Probably not.
I hate how much sense that makes because I was like, I'm going to be honest, I forgot about Swan because I thought about Hurley. I thought about Ricky. No, it'd be
Bryce
Swan.
Underwood. Can Bryce Underwood play in this game?
Buddy, if Bryce Underwood could get to Baton Rouge one more time, that would be nice. They actually got eliminated from the playoffs, so I'm freaking out about that. Anyway, so point being, with Swan, I like those chances better because Swan is, a veteran quarterback with starting chances. So to your point, you're so right. I thought we were preparing for the future after Nussmeier and starting him for another year. But with Swan in the cards, I think 3 picks. Like there's not like a Carson Beck situation here where it's like, oh, just ride this out. We got a great defense. Like,
I have not sold my AJ Swan stock. I'm still kind of a believer. There's some meat on the bone with him. Maybe it'll be at LSU, maybe it won't. But Will, I'm calling for a Vandy upset. I'm doing it.
Yeah,
I'm doing it. I'm going to say Diego Pavia looks fresher than ever coming off of the bye week. He completes 60% of his passes for the first time since the Kentucky win. Vandy is just the team that wants it more. This stage of the season, sometimes you see that play out, and it can be very evident with these teams that don't have these expectations that they thought they were going to have at this point. I think things go from bad to worse for Brian Kelly at LSU. Clark Lee locks in a win, locks in SEC Coach of the Year honors by beating Bama and LSU in the same season.
So LSU, let me see here. Of course, why would the SEC not have? Okay, here we go. So it's the classic like two guys laughing at each other meme where it's like, okay, Alabama lost to Vandy, but if Vandy beats LSU, they're going to finish ahead of LSU in SEC play, likely. So that's like pretty crazy. This isn't even an emotional hedge. I think Vandy is a better football team than LSU right now. I think that a 7.5-point spread for Diego Pavia, who's been awesome in as an underdog. Am I going to once again hang on, nebulous hope of maybe things will change? Maybe the players only meeting will do it. I mean, from a talent standpoint, technically from a coaching standpoint, LSU should be the better team. But it all gets, whenever you have a quarterback like Pavia, who's been the right amount of confident versus a quarterback that has never been confident, but has been too confident at times in Garrett Nussmeier. I think that's kind of like a problem. And to your point about the environment, like if you're an LSU fan and you brave the Alabama game, last weekend, what do you, or like weekend before, like why would you show up to this game to potentially watch your team lose to Vandy? So probably going to be not a great Tiger Stadium. What I'm saying, like, to your point, and they shouldn't need that against Vandy at any capacity when you think about like the athletic restrictions and the commitment to football and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go, the crowd, blame the crowd. Nah, I get it to some degree, and LSU fans can be a little bit spoiled when it comes to like, I feel like sometimes it's like, you guys don't understand how bad we looked for like most of the 2010s. So like whenever bad things happen now because of Twitter, people are like, we got to fire everybody. It's like, guys, we hung out with Les Miles for like 8 extra years. Anyway, so point being, like, I think this season is pretty effectively over for LSU. There's not too much that could happen. So to that point, when you have one team that has a ton to play for and one team without anything to play for, other than like Bryce Underwood's kind of the main thing LSU's playing for at this point, which is
that's sad.
That's
really sad, man.
And to be clear, that's why they are not going to fire Joe Sloan. Now, if they lose Bryce Underwood, then you start looking at Joe Sloan. So weirdly, it's like Joe Sloan's coaching for his job, not even against – it's losing the game would shake up the Bryce Underwood situation, which could then lose him his job. So he needs – like that's his motivation.
If there wasn't the Bryce Underwood elements to this, and if you were just told as an LSU fan, you could watch this game and then swap coordinators for the next year and get Tim Beck, would you do it?
Oh, man. I don't know. I mean, I really like, we see what he can do, with a mobile quarterback and those, I mean, they can run the ball. No, I would take them. And just to like put a bow on this whole thing, what LSU struggled with is mobile quarterbacks. It's what Diego Pavia is. It's just they struggled last week with the mobile quarterback. You know what I'm saying? Like Diego Pavia is certainly better than better than Lagway. I would argue he's
as
better than
a
Jalen
mobile
Miller.
quarterback. As a mobile quarterback, I think different when you're talking about throwing the football. Different elements of
I think
what
he's better
they do.
as a quarterback. I mean, look what he's done as a starter. Like I get that there's some almost wins there, but like the difference is the fourth down play against Alabama versus the one against Tennessee with Lagway, and I think with Hurts or not Hurts, Milroe. I think that objectively this year he's been a better quarterback than Milroe for the entire year. He won the head-to-head game. Like Milroe had the bad turnovers in that game, so like that's the thing. This is the best quarterback LSU's seen. He's been the best quarterback in the SEC for most of the year. Yeah, they beat Jackson Dart, totally different ball game now. So, yeah, I think that's the thing. This team does well what LSU does poorly at. And on the other side of the ball, I mean, yeah, you need your offense to really ball out. And I don't know what we've seen that, makes us feel that way when we have one pretty decent receiver. Brian Kelly's yelling at the other two. It's just a mess. It's a situation that LSU needed to be an offense-first team with Blake Baker, and their offense doesn't have the gumption and leadership to stay on the field. Well, they did against Florida. But anyway, you get it. I'm picking Vandy in like a 3-point loss that will make me wish I was at not a pumpkin patch because it's a little late in the year, but like a nice campfire.
We're at Christmas tree season, just about.
I should do that this weekend. That would cheer me up.
Be a good time to do it for LSU football fans. Get in early. Get your pick of the litter if you do the real tree. This is kind of those like local stores are just popping up right now. What do you think Diego Pavia would do if you gave him an apparatus telling him you can't be mobile this game? Would he shed it like Forrest Gump? Because I think he would.
I think he would take it off in the free play and just kind of throw it loosely at the defense.
I don't think he'd throw it at the defense.
No, but like not at someone, but just in the second level, just to make them all go, huh?
Yeah.
And then like have them go, what? And then he snaps the ball.
Yeah. Be a good plan. Wow, I'm surprised we're both calling for the Vandy upset. Could be very, very interesting times on the Bayou. All right, fade of the week. Last week, go watch Scott Van Pelt on Bad Beats. He and I can relate, but for different reasons with that specific Boise State, San Jose State game. Little different because the fade of the week was San Jose State plus 13.5. He was talking about it from plus 14.5, different with how that game finished out. Still in a game in which San Jose State was up 14-0, did not cover a 2-touchdown spread. The fade hit though, so I guess technically we're on a roll there. This week, Will, Ohio State's a 13.5-point favorite. Who do they play against?
Girl, the Hoosiers.
They do.
What did you call them? The Candy Stripes?
Candy Stripes. I didn't call them that. Somebody like 50 years ago called them that. Look, do I want to see my alma mater keep it within 2 touchdowns at Ohio State? Of course I do. Absolutely. Am I also acknowledging the possibility that this is a 52-10 game in which the internet just gets in fights about Indiana's resume and 1 loss versus this 2-loss team here? And what does it mean? Why are we comparing Indiana to Penn State? Am I fully anticipating that type of discourse by mid-afternoon Saturday? Yes, I am, Will. Yes, I am. Emotional hedge, call it what you will. It's fine. I think game flow is really important for IU because the selection committee will be watching this one. Allegedly, that's what they say. It's one thing if it's 21-0 in the first quarter and Indiana never gets closer. It's a different story if it's a 7-point game with 9 minutes left and then Ohio State kind of pulls away late. I think there's very different ways to interpret that final score.
They'll be up for that.
Look, been around long enough to know that great things happen to great people. And there are certain people that don't get nice things. Indiana football has gotten a lot of nice things this year. A win in Columbus is the nicest possible thing that Indiana could ever hope to obtain. I think it could get ugly. But, if IU wins this game, discussion for number 1 team in the country with maybe the most impressive win. I'm just saying.
What's the most, like, what do you think they have to do for this to not matter if they lose? Like, do you think if they keep it within 1 score, they're fine? Do you think 2 scores does it?
Room for interpretation. I think the big number is going to be 2 touchdowns.
Okay.
I think keep it within 2 touchdowns. Make it feel like Ohio State isn't sitting there with starters on the sideline in the fourth quarter, laughing it up. Indiana fighting for garbage points that are just trying to, eliminate a 4-touchdown margin just to make it look better. I think it just depends how you feel watching the course of this game. Does it feel like two teams that could actually be playing in the playoff? Because this is the type of game that the selection committee could, in theory, send Indiana to play. And fair or not, when you're a program that has lost more games than any power conference team in the sport, you're going to be judged based on that. And yeah, it is all about this game. I fully not like if Indiana loses this game, if they lose this game convincingly, they will be squarely on the bubble and probably in need of chaos to get into the playoff. I definitely admit that. Okay, I won't sit here and be the person that says that 11-1 Indiana undoubtedly deserves to get in. I will be the person that might point out the resume compared to Penn State's, but we don't need to go down that road. We don't need to go down that road. Let's let this game play out. Ohio State minus 13.5 is the fate of the week.
What a just great meme. It's like, oh, what a beautiful season. New playoff, format. Teams are losing. It's like, okay, well, we got Texas and Alabama on just kind of an easy path to the championship. I have just picked my favorite team, or picked Vandy to beat my favorite team, and now you are. It's like, here's where we always naturally end up, isn't it? Oh, that's just ended up here. But yeah, no, I'm with you. It's a little diabolical, but I get it. I think that either way, it's an emotional hedge, and you know how I do those, so I get it.
You know what's kind of weird too? If Indiana doesn't end up getting into the playoff, and if they find a way to spoil the 10-0 start, and if you end up looking at the playoff field, what it was compared to those preseason predictions, it's actually going to end up being pretty chalky, despite the fact that it felt like a crazy year, And I realized, because I was going through, I did something for SDS, like looking back on my 12-team playoff predictions coming into the year. Do not look at the fact that I had Oklahoma State and Florida State both getting into the playoff with first-round buys. Don't look at that. But for the most part, it'll be a really, really chalky playoff field if Indiana isn't ultimately able to make it there. Like isn't that kind of crazy to think about? Of all we spent so much time. Is this 2014? Is this 2007? Indiana's really the only piece remaining that can make it feel like one of those seasons.
Yeah, I hate to say it's always how it works, but it's like, you expand. It's if you're trying to get to 4, then that kind of gets to the top. But if you have a crazy season like this, which I'm not going to go into what the 4 would be or whatever, but it's like, because it's a different committee or it's a different situation. But yeah, it's crazy that we're always going to end up. That's the thing about college football, man. A lot of it does really come down to resources and money. I hate to say it that way, but when you look at the way the championships have gone, specifically towards the SEC and how much they care about football, it's like, yeah, it's nice to see these upsets. But now there's in the regular season, it's just going to matter less, really. So yeah, it's been a great season. This has been one of my favorite seasons of all time. Like my team independent, I can always do that. 2008 was also a really fun season for me. So point being, like, but yeah, I think that at the end of the day, like, you end up here pretty much no matter what.
We'll see if we're there on Saturday. We will see. That Indiana State game will have a huge, huge say in that.
Do I have any chance that I need to know?
While you're wearing your candy stripe pants?
I'm going to do the bag. I got Christmas stuff, so I might throw some of that on.
Look, we don't need to get into chance.
Are you okay?
I don't want you all of a sudden jumping on the bandwagon if you've been on it, but not with as Will smacks the mic.
Well, because you're sabotaging your beautiful Hoosiers.
Look, if you've been off the bandwagon, now is not the time to all of a sudden come on board and start rooting for all things IU. Like, let's keep things as nobody touch anything. Okay. Everybody freeze. All right, everything's gonna be okay. I'll text you. Don't worry. We'll get it figured out. All right, let's kick it to Sony Michel. Great to chat with the Georgia legend. He was there in Athens last weekend for the Tennessee game, so we discussed that. We discussed his career and much, much more with Sony. So here he is, Sony Michel. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Georgia legend, 2-time Super Bowl champ. It is Sony Michel. Sony, got a ton that I want to get to with you, including what Georgia did this past weekend at Tennessee on Saturday night. But I want to start with what you did by getting back to your alma mater, being able to partner with Kingsford for a tailgate that you guys did. Just tell us about bringing the good vibes and how you were able to do that with Kingsford.
Definitely. This partnership with Kingsford was amazing, right? Getting the opportunity to come back to Athens, to engage with a lot of the fans, even had some of my close friends come. And I think that's what Kingsford is really all about, right? Bringing friends and family together. Because when you bring out the grill, right, what's no better way to come together and fellowship around the grill? and definitely letting those fans come in and be able to interact with myself, allowing them to try some of those samples that they had out there. I mean, definitely, I was probably eating a little bit more than they were, because I was beating them to it. But it was awesome. I don't think you know that was probably the best tailgate I've been to, you know, in my time tailgating.
You've had probably a different sort of perspective now, being able to see it from the other side, and you've experienced plenty of fall Saturdays in Athens, obviously, but just being able to sit back and watch that matchup, how special was that atmosphere on Saturday night?
The atmosphere was special. The fans came out, they showed out. The players came to play from both sides. Hard fought game, and but the Dogs obviously came out on top, and which is what we all wanted. And it was great, man. I'm glad I was there, and I'm glad those guys got the victory because it puts them right in the place they wanted to be.
How many times have you been able to get back on campus and be able to kind of experience Georgia from a fan side? Because obviously, you're not playing in the NFL right now, but being able to kind of step back and like be a fan and soak all this in. How often have you been able to do that?
I try to get up at least once a year. But for me, I like to kind of just sit back home, watch the game on TV, kind of kick back with my feet up, get on the grill a little bit, get to be in my own environment for the most part. And I think that was super important to me, but it was definitely awesome to get back for this one, and watch it live.
Nate Frazier, he gets the start as a true freshman running back in this game. First true freshman running back to start at Georgia since you did in the bowl game 2014. What were your thoughts on seeing him? What have your thoughts been on kind of seeing the way that he's been able to emerge in this Georgia offense?
Oh, it's been awesome, right? To see, one, get to meet him as a person, right? I got an opportunity to meet him a couple times, definitely was in that locker room for that game, and just to see where his mindset was and see how he was kind of getting ready to prep for the game, I thought was awesome. And he definitely took that role serious of starting because it's not easy to start in those major games. Um, and just knowing his skill set, knowing who he is, and knowing who he's coached by, that we're only going to see great things from him coming, in the near future.
What's the Sony Michel pep talk? What's that like when you're trying to, talk to a guy that's 18 years old, that's got seemingly everything in front of him? Like, what do you say to a guy like that to kind of get his mind right?
Don't be scared to score touchdowns. That's all I say. Don't be scared to score touchdowns. Like, nobody, listen, you've been scoring touchdowns all your life. Just don't be scared. Super simple. Because I like for a guy to be in his own zone. Definitely don't want to be in his space too much. So I keep it super simple. Just put a little nugget in the back of his head, because that's not, I know something I would have liked for a player to come in and kind of just tell me something quick for me to keep in the back of my mind.
I'm gonna take that approach for the rest of my day, the rest of my year. Don't be afraid to score touchdowns, just in everything in life. I love that. That's really good. You and Nick Chubb obviously became this iconic duo at Georgia, and Gurley, being there your freshman year, you guys were a trio. People always love to pull up the picture of you three, but for so long, you and Nick were just linked together. Do you have a favorite Nick Chubb story from all that time that you got to spend with him?
Favorite Nick Chubb story. Um, I think, you know, my favorite one to tell, I have plenty of stories on him, but I think the best one that he would approve of me telling is just our level of competition for each other, right? When we was playing with each other, we kind of used to create these little goals, or yeah, I'll call them goals, where we just had like, hey, I'll just call them rules. We had rules with ourselves in the running back room, where it was just like, hey, if you get stopped within the 5 yard line at any point, whether you broke a 70 yard run or whether it was a goal line run, if you don't score within 5 yards, you have to come out. The next guy, because you don't deserve the touchdown, the next guy gets the touchdown. Because it's just a mindset of how bad do you want it. And then we have little indicators that most people didn't know, like, if he started the game and we didn't really tap our helmet because we always thought that was a sign of weakness. So if he had this thing where he crossed his legs. In the moment he crossed his legs, I knew he was tired. So I was like running the game, and kind of help him out. So I thought that was something most people didn't know.
Did you take in some of those 600-pound squat performances that he would deliver and think to yourself, I've got to follow that guy because I imagine you're in the same weightlifting group as him. And that, I mean, from my perspective, that doesn't seem like a fair thing to have to compete with.
Yeah, so I tried to compete with him as much as possible. Obviously, a lot of that strength he got is God given, so I would always go before him, and try to push myself as much, and then he would just slap on a couple more plates and just kind of, make it look effortless.
I think we all have a pretty good idea, at least at this point, how intense Kirby Smart is. He looks certainly intense at all points of the game. What was your experience with him early on? Because he shows up and, your 2 years, you see a different coach in Mark Richt than you do in Kirby Smart, obviously. But I imagine the contrast between those two coaches was pretty stark.
Oh yeah, definitely. Obviously, two great coaches. They both have their own styles, their own coaching styles. Coach Rick was a little bit more hands off, offensive mind guy. Obviously, he played quarterback, so he would just sit back and kind of tighten up on some of the details. And Coach Smart was a defensive mind, right? Super intense, very, energetic. Obviously, he was younger than Rick was at the time that I had him. But Coach Smart was one of those coaches that he knew how to flip that switch. He was very intense when we got in the lines, got between the lines, and he knew how to put his hands around us when we walked off of that field. So we understood anytime he was coaching us hard that it was out of love.
I know that transfer rules are different then compared to now, but did you ever have any thought about transferring, or was that just not a possibility because you still would have been an undergrad, so you would have had to have sat that following year if you did that?
Yeah, no, I've never really thought about transferring. Um, for me, it was all about really competing. Yes, did things get hard for me at times? Yes, anytime you're competing on that level, it's really hard, and it's one of those things where you just got to put your head down and keep competing, and it will work out for you eventually. And that's what I did, and I had great guys around me: Todd Gurley, Keith Marshall, Nick Chubb, where I basically pushed myself to their level. So whatever they did, if they broke a 50-yard run touchdown, I kind of felt some type of way about that. It was just like, all right, now you have to go. Like, all right, Sony, you got to get in there and score or do something as equivalent to what they just did. And it just kind of kept that healthy battle between us.
Take me back to 2016 because it's kind of the lost year of Georgia football in somewhat recent memory, and you guys were going through a very different transition offensively and having a true freshman starter in Jacob Eason. But to experience that first year with Kirby and knowing like, all right, you see, where did you sort of see, guys, this is going to get better. We're going to figure things out. Like where were the signs that year that made you think that not only was it going to get better, but it was worth staying around that senior year to get better?
At first it was tough, because we lost to Vanderbilt, and that's a no-no to lose to Vanderbilt. But understanding that Coach Smart had a plan for us, and we believed in his plan wholeheartedly. And that's what we did, right? We stuck with it, and we knew, man, if we give it another opportunity, this will pan out.
The 2017 season is one that Georgia fans, even though obviously the ending was what it was, they'll still look back fondly forever. And you're so, entrenched and so synonymous with that. How often do you think about your Rose Bowl performance? Because if I were you, I'd probably be thinking about it right now as I'm asking you questions.
Um, for me, we didn't, it wasn't the championship, right? So it was a great time. It was a great game and a great play for me, play that I've made at the end of the game to get us to that championship game. But ultimately we didn't win, and that's what we really wanted, right? We wanted to get that, to raise that trophy up. But it's awesome to see the guys after us to be able to raise that trophy up. And in that game, when people bring that game up to me, it's awesome because we get to share so many different experiences, whether it was in the stands, me being on the field. And one thing I bring up when they bring up the touchdown, it's just like, man, do you remember when I fumbled right before, right? Where I thought, man, my career is over right here. And then, just kind of putting my head down mentality, and it just worked out for me where nobody even remembers that play, right? They all remember that last play where I scored the touchdown, which, I'm very grateful for.
Okay, let's talk about that last play because Wild Dog is the call. It's a direct snap to you in double overtime. What's underrated about that play is two things. one, you get a fastball snap that's high, and if you're not ready for it and locked in, that's going over your head like kind of easily, and then maybe you need a field goal to try and force triple overtime, like that part's underrated, and your handling of that snap, and then the Jake Fromm block to be able to kind of free you up on the outside in the way that everything just kind of came together that play. I think all those things are always worth dissecting, but I've always wondered how in the world did you not lose your mind celebrating knowing that you just got Georgia to the national championship? Because your celebration afterwards is pretty subdued.
Yeah, so I get to really um think about it and kind of get all the emotions out now, right? That like that it was over with, but in that moment it was so hard to understand. For me, it was so many different emotions just running through my body because it was a wave of good and bad plays. And yes, I had better plays than bad plays, but that one fumble kind of took my mind to another place. So the moment I scored that touchdown, I was just like, all right, let's get out of here. Like, let's go back to Athens because I don't want to be in this place anymore, right? Like, I just did good. Let's get out of here. So the celebration was super subtle and laid back because it was just like, you know, this just ended in an unimaginable way, right? So for me, it was just like, man, I don't even really know how to express my emotions.
You have a walk-off touchdown to send your team to a national championship for the first time in 35 years, whatever it was, and you're thinking relief, relief. Just I don't have to worry about that last play. That's crazy because I can't imagine what that was like for you thinking after that play, like, oh my God, like what did I just do? When did that reality truly settle in for you? Was it the ride home? Was it even just getting to the national championship? Like, how long did it take for you to process? I just made one of the historic plays in the history of college football.
It hit me way like probably once I was in an NFL where people kept kind of bringing up that play, retweeting that play, posting that play, kind of just the conversations even now, right? Having this conversation now makes me think like, wow, I actually did that. Like, it's crazy. I didn't think that it was that big of a deal. I thought the national championship was the biggest deal. But the idea of how this is so memorable for people, that's what makes me kind of think, oh, shoot, this was a really historic moment.
We won't talk about the game after. Instead, do you remember what it was like to get that call from Belichick that you were being picked by the Patriots in the first round?
Yeah, it was awesome. You talking about something that wasn't planned, like you don't know who's about to call you. Um, Emotions are wavering, right? And once you get that call, for me, it was about, wow, my life is about to change forever. I get an opportunity to live my dream, right? And having that dream job is just so huge because like there's so many people that's scared to chase their dreams, right? And the fact that I was able to take that risk and chase my dreams and actually accomplish it, such a surreal phone call for me to know that, wow, this is it.
Brady, I imagine afterwards is like, Sony, we're gonna have to get to know each other a little bit. Was he like reaching out to you immediately? Like, how does that process go? And someone of like his caliber, all of a sudden you realize like, oh my God, that's the guy that I'm going to be taking handoffs from.
Um, he didn't reach out to me immediately. Um, Once he came into OT mini camp at the time because he didn't go to OTAs. I remember we were doing handoff, just on air handoffs with the quarterbacks, and he was kind of like, "Oh, I want to get a handoff with Sony," and I thought in my head like, "Oh shoot, he's like, you want to get a handoff with me?" But I think it was his way of kind of building my confidence. And it was it was time in the year where in training camp where I got hurt, and for me, I was kind of like, "Oh, let me just focus on rehabbing. The team's gonna be fine." And he kind of came up to me in the hallway and he was just like, listen, you're not redshirting this year. So like, get that out your mind. Like, get ready because we need you. And then that kind of clicked that trigger for me where it's like, oh, shoot, like I am another piece of this puzzle.
This has been great, man. Really, really appreciate the time. I want to get you out of here with some rapid fire. Just 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. First one. You're a Kingsford man. What's your favorite thing to grill?
Burgers.
Duh. Obvious. All right. What's the most intimidating road venue that you played in while you were at Georgia?
I hate to say it, but Tennessee.
Ooh. Okay. Wouldn't know it based on the way the last 8 years have gone, but
Yeah.
that's a good answer. Okay. Whose doghouse was more terrifying to be in, Kirby or Belichick's?
Ooh, Belichick.
The fact that you actually thought about that tells me a lot, though. That's
Yeah, but then I thought about, well, you can lose a job in one dog's house, and then the other one you have more a chance to stay on, still on the team.
that's a good point. That's a good point. Okay. Did Tom Brady ever sell you on the TB12 method?
He did. He did.
All right. Say no more. You're a Kingsford man. That's all we need to know.
I am
That's
a
all we need.
Kingsford man. And listen, Connor, do you have a grill?
Yes, I do.
Gas or charcoal?
We don't need to discuss that.
If you, so that tells me a lot right there. You have gas and you need to change to charcoal. Holiday season is coming up. Trust me, I had both. This charcoal, go get Kingsford and trust me, we'll reconnect and you tell me how it goes. I promise you your holiday season will go wonderful.
Okay,
Super easy, super simple.
that pitch to me on charcoal was better than the Tom Brady TB12 pitch to you. I think we could say that. Yeah.
His was similar. It was and listen, his was similar and he was right. So I think you should take me for my word.
Fair enough. All right, last one for you. Does Georgia win a national championship this year?
Of course. We're
There we
due.
go.
We're due for one. They took one from us last year. We're due for one this year.
It's been a whole 2 years.
Yeah, it's not going to be as smooth as people want it to be because they want it to be a perfect story. But yeah, we win.
Heard it here first. Georgia will end the national championship drought, the long national championship drought, and win it all this year. Sony, really appreciate the time, man. Best of luck with everything that you've got going with Kingsford and this next chapter in life, man.
Appreciate you.
All right, well, let's close with some lad of the week. Are you going with Jim McElwain for his retirement? Breaking news, by the way, before we start recording this podcast. Retirement. Jim McElwain, the Shark Man himself.
Man, a Green Day like time of your life montage to his time at Florida would be so electric. I would watch the heck out of that, just like all the weird moments he had. Anyway, no, I'm gonna go do a little bit of crow eating here, right? And just for two guys that I've given a lot of crap to this year, I think they both really answered the bell last weekend. Starting with Carson Beck, we just talked about potentially benching veteran quarterbacks. I think that Beck is a guy that has kind of been through it all. He's seen kind of the high highs, the low lows. And I think that, at a point in his career where his back was against the wall, we talked about this with Kirby and how those teams often play well in those situations, except against Alabama. Like they really, really like showed out. And, the funny thing about Georgia is we've had is it Bobo's fault? Is it Beck's fault? Is it the receiver's fault? Whoever it would be. It's like, that was a game to me where, okay, yeah, Bobo's solid, but Beck really, this was the first game, like I said, it's the best game of his career at the time. And I think they had to have it. They had to have it to stay in the conversation. And so good for him. I think that, who's to say what the future holds there for him? I don't know, where his NFL future is, but I think he did a lot to earn some money on Saturday. And then the second one is going to be Billy Napier, man. I've, made a lot of jokes at his expense. He definitely, embarrassed my team on Saturday. As a video editor guy, Florida was publishing highlight videos about LSU videos that I don't remember. That's how long it had been since LSU had lost to Florida. Like there had been a whole generation of their video staff come through, and I'm just imagining it being like the Cubs where they're like texting each other and they're like, "The video you pitched in 2019, we finally made it happen, man. We did it." And so like I was like, is that supposed to make me feel bad? Thank you. I forgot that happened. But anyway, so Billy Napier, man, he's made a little bit of splash on the recruiting trail. He's rumored, that was his big thing, and and the results on the field have been what they have. We haven't got to see him as this great recruiter that he was kind of in year one. And so I think, he's starting to rebuild the trust of the public. I'm not going to say he's going to, be the next Urban Meyer or the next Steve Spurrier or anything. But I think that, again, we're this back against the wall. And I was talking to my buddy, I'm sure Florida fans will enjoy this. I was talking to my buddy in the preseason who was a UCF grad. And it was like, wow, Florida, where are these wins going to come from? I was joking with him on Saturday. Dude, we got them to a bowl game. Congratulations. LSU and UCF, they're going to be the two teams that did it. And so, yeah, I think, obviously there have been some dark moments. And when the schedule came out, we knew that was going to be the case. But I think that, they have had this team playing well. And I think that's a really, really big deal when everybody wrote them off.
If Billy gets to a decade at Florida, the unthinkable, will you shave your head like him?
I think if any current SEC coach, except for Kirby, gets to a decade, I'm going to be living in fear of that person.
who could actually get to a decade.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Stoops is gone after this year, pretty much. We've talked about, so that's like a different.
But he's already passed.
Yeah, he's already
so
there.
that doesn't count. Lane has got to be in that conversation because next year would be year 6 for Lane at Ole Miss. Lane is the number 3 elder statesman. Heupel is certainly a candidate as well. There's no doubt about it. I don't think Tennessee fans are going to be sweating the Oklahoma potential decision there. But TBD on that. Yeah, it's so difficult to forecast. It's literally an impossible exercise. I don't even know why. Elko at A&M, could that be one? That's very interesting. So yeah, look, I think there's certainly a lot of praise that Billy Napier deserves because you don't usually come back from that at a big time job when you're dead man walking. We said how many times we say in the show in September, he's done. Stick a fork in him. He knows he's done. Like that to me is a really, really hard thing to do. And no matter how this turns out, like he deserves at least some credit for that. And not just pitching, but actually winning a game like this that mattered and should be able to
starting quarterback, having a starting running back hurdle. Yeah. I mean, like he's had to overcome even more than we thought. He's done it so much better than we thought he would.
Yeah. All right. I got a sad one here. If you have ever heard barking in the background of this podcast, it was the dog Lucy, she is a little chai weenie. She is not our dog. She's an adorable dog. She was the dog of Lawrence Boss, who lives 6 minutes away. Used to have burgers with him every single Tuesday, and Lucy would tag along. We have house sat, and Lucy has come over to our house a considerable amount. She and Rudy have had a fun back and forth relationship. Claire's gotten to know Lucy. Lucy got really sick over the course of the last week. She was literally here less than a week ago, and got really sick over the course of the last few days and unfortunately had to be put down. And Tuesday was a really hard day. Dog that we've gotten to know for the last 8 years. And even though it's not your own dog, you don't see it every single day. Anytime, we would be taking care of Lucy or something like that for the day. And Lucy was the type of dog that when you came in from the garage, she just would freak out and would be so excited. Hi. How's it going? And was just that type of dog. Loved a good lizard hunt. Was not very good at that, but did her darn best. And was just such a loyal, great dog. And so we went over to their house yesterday, and I rubbed her belly for probably a half hour. And it was tough, man. It was really, really hard. And it's tough too, considering she's like the same age as Rudy. They're both 12, and you just never know. You just never know with pets. And it's a good reminder of appreciate the time you have with your pets. I know you went through that loss and know exactly what that's like. A few weeks, I guess, was that a month ago? It just sucks. It's something that you put out of sight, out of mind all the time with pets that are in your life that you think that you'll ever have to deal with that. And then when you do, it just, man, it hits like a Mack truck. It really did. And it was very, very hard to say goodbye to that dog. One of the favorite dogs of my entire life. And she'll be missed, man. She'll definitely be missed.
What an absolutely good girl, man. I just to your point, we talked about her, heard the barking in the background, try not to look at you guys because this stuff makes me sad. But yeah, that sucks. And it sucks, we're not going to get into the pets and stuff that happened lately, but it's always tough because we see, animals are just so innocent. And that's why so many people love them, because it's like, your dogs can play with you and stuff, but they're never going to be it's some, have some ulterior motive unless they just want treats. So it's really sweet to be around an animal like that. And to your point, watching a dog that can't chase a lizard or that's bad at chasing lizards is one of the best activities of all time. So thoughts to you guys at this time. And sucks, man. Feels like this year just keeps yearing, but it's over soon, luckily.
Thank goodness, man. Been a tough one. Too many of those. Would hopefully in 2025 going to have very limited lad or lasses of the week that are death related. But unfortunately, death is a part of life. All right. On that note, week 13. Hopefully everybody enjoys Cake Week. Hopefully this isn't a pumpkin patch Saturday for you, a Christmas tree Saturday, if you will. But yes, we'll have full recap pod on Sunday. If you haven't, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SCS pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Goes Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.